work. I think to start, then I'll just have us do just a little bit of a grounding, coming into the room, and just a short piece. And then I'm going to pull up a PowerPoint slide and share some slides with you and talk through the heart of ACT and what it means to work on presence in the therapy room. So I'll invite you just to start to just take a deep breath, and as you blow out, either gently close your eyes or focus your eyes on a spot in front of you. Let yourself begin to settle, noticing any experiences that you might have in your body. Perhaps sensation of your feet on the floor or the clothes on your skin. The pressure of sitting. Just be aware of where you are in the now. And then I'll invite you to turn your attention to the breath, but specifically to the rise and fall of your chest. Noticing the rise, noticing the fall. Being aware of this movement within you. This steady pattern of change. And expanding your awareness, see if you can touch into all of the movement that is going on within you. Just being aware of it to whatever degree possible. That your heart is beating. Blood is flowing. Cells are moving. Notice the massive amount of movement and change that occurs within this self-universe, this place called you. This movement is ever present. There is an ever-present experience of change. Now with a few deep breaths, I'll invite you to return to the room. Welcome back. So you just take a few deep breaths and return. Hopefully you got centered a bit with that. I have to say that I didn't get so centered because right as soon as I started, I have 3 dogs and they started running around the room. And so I had a little bit of trouble. So my apologies, but hopefully they'll get settled in now and not continue to disturb what it is that we're doing. Meghna, could you give me the ability to share my screen? Thank you. By the way, if you think of questions along the way, because I'm going to give us some time to do some questions and answers toward the end, feel free to type them into the chat box so that if you don't forget, so that you don't forget them as we go. And so, as mentioned, I'm going to be talking about creating presence through processes in clinical practice, but from a particular perspective. I'm going to be speaking to it from the perspective of acceptance and commitment therapy. And for those of you familiar with the model, this will look particularly familiar to you. This will have been the model you have seen with the 6 core processes: acceptance, diffusion, self as context, committed action, contact with the present moment, and values. This is really the essence of the work. And if you are someone who's been trained in this approach, you probably would have seen all of these 6 core processes many times in lots of the trainings, all in the service of psychological flexibility. So our goal here is to help people be able to vary their behavior and their responses, their reactions in such fashion that they are able to adapt to different contexts. They're able to be more fluid in their responding to what's happening, be more open, present to their experience. Arusha, is it too noisy? Let me see. I don't know what's going on there. Sudden. let me just take care of this issue for 1 second. Hey, Daisy. Sorry. This is the thing of doing it from home, right? This is the thing. So we're doing all of this work in the service of becoming more flexible. And some of the things that we know about being able to adapt to your environment and vary your behavior such that you're more flexible is that it creates better well-being. Like if you look at all the data that is about becoming flexible, almost everything that you look at supports greater health, whether it's physical health, psychological health, emotional health. That kind of flexibility is very important. And these core processes, I think, are quite useful in terms of helping people move towards a more flexible presence in their lives. The only thing that I would do if I were going to rename these processes and get to the core of what we're working on here is I would add an ing so that they begin to take on a verb quality. We're constantly accepting. We're diffusing again and again. We're present momenting, self as contexting, valuing, acting. And so if you think of the three pillars of ACT as open, aware, and engaged, I would encourage us to think of it as opening, awareing, and engaging. It is a never-ending process, and I'm going to wrap back around to this when I get towards the end of my talk today. The other thing that's really important when you start thinking about bringing this work into the therapy room is that the context of how we use these matters. And the flow of how we use these matters as well. So even though we often see the 6 core processes laid out this way, it's a little less likely that you're seeing all of the interrelationships between these and how they flow together. And so we have work to do in that area, but even more than that, all of those core processes plus the flow in between them is happening inside of a context. And what is that context? What is it that we're looking at here? And I think there's multiple layers that are going to help us begin to unpack this. First, there's the context of you. And so what is happening for you in the therapy room is going to be just as important as what's happening for the client. And if we turn this model on its side and think about all of the processes going on together, it's going to be important for you to be opening and awareing and engaging. So there's an intrapersonal process that's happening inside the room. It's all the emotion and thought experience that's flowing within yourself. And we want to create a space from an ACT perspective where you're awake, alive, and curious about your internal states and inside that room. What are your senses, your emotions, your mind? What's happening? And so think about the exercise that I introduced us with. I just wanted to give you a sense of motion, of all that's going on inside of you and how ephemeral it is, that it's on the move. And attending to this can be incredibly important in terms of connecting with a sense of self that I'm going to come to here in a bit. And then ultimately, the interpersonal process involves practicing growing your awareness, your awakeness to what's going on inside of you. So the 6 core processes are happening, and we're applying them to ourselves inside of an intrapersonal process. And then there's the interpersonal process. There's another context to which we need to be aware, which is the relationship between the two of you. And so that's a larger context. So there's a context of what's going on inside of you. And now I've got the context of what's going on between you and the client. And what I want to say here is that this is a little bit more complicated. It's you and the other person engaged in a dynamic quality, right? Like think about how sessions go. They're filled with a lot of different material, and sometimes they cover a lot of territory. And so it's a dynamic quality of the relationship between both of you, and that you're working together to promote change, growth, evolution, or whatever movement is desired and agreed upon by the two of you. So there's another process that's a container for the 6 core processes. And we don't often hear about these two. And then there's yet a third. There's an overarching and ongoing process. So there's the interpersonal process, the interpersonal process, and then how that changes across time. And how you and your client's relationship shifts and moves and changes as you work towards what it is that you are hoping to gain in the therapeutic process. So if I could summarize, the work in ACT therapy is to continuously assess and influence behavior, including attending to changes across time and context, using the 6 core processes. So it sort of gives us a broad sense of what's happening inside of the therapy room. And if I were going to put into a question what it is that we want to be doing in therapy, it's this kind of complicated question from an ACT perspective. And I'm just going to read the question directly. How do we convey the interaction between client, therapist, and intervention occurring in a context such that the function of behavior is targeted for change and principles are applied in an ongoing and process-oriented fashion? Now, as I read that question, I'm hoping that you're hearing the complexity of what it is that we're being asked to do. Like, how do we get to this place of conveying all of these relationships and inside of these multiple levels of context such that we're seeing how behavior works and we're changing, applying behaviors and changing behaviors in ways that are helpful to the client? But it's just not this. If we think about therapeutic presence, it's just not this. There's another piece that I want to add in, and has heart. So how do we do all of this and bring something that has heart to the intervention? So it's not just a dry intervention scenario, but it's alive and fluid and connected. And this is what I mean by heart. And I'm going to have us now take a look at what it means to open to the heart of ACT and to think about this not just as sets of processes that we would use, but what presence do we bring in using this? How do we have heart for the work that we're doing when we're doing this particular intervention? So I guess I want to start with this idea of, have you ever been out and tasted a really delicious dish? Like you're going out to the restaurant and maybe you even get to see the chef throwing in the spices and adding all of the wonderful ingredients, and you taste it and it's just a yummy, delicious dish. And then you so like it that you're going to go home and try to make it yourself. And you do. And it just doesn't taste the same. Has anybody ever been there and tried something like that? Right? It just does not taste like it did. And part of that is what I want to speak to, is there's a process of learning and growing and adding spices and, pulling something back and trying something new that is about creating a sense of full and engaged presence in the room. If you're going to taste the delicious dish of therapy, it's a process that you're going to engage as you think about, what else am I going to do in terms of paying attention to myself, what's going on in me, what's going on between us, and what's happening over time as I tuck in these 6 core processes to those contexts. And that getting to delicious dishes means a kind of ongoing engagement in this experimenting with what to add and what not to add. So one of the things that I would like to kind of caution against, I suppose, and I want to be careful here because I use a lot of techniques myself, but to start, I would like to reorient us to process itself. because in acceptance and commitment therapy, there's a lot of techniques, right? There's exercises and metaphors and a book called The Big Book of Exercises and Metaphors. And there's all these different types of techniques that you can use. But when you move in that direction, the heart goes down, if I can say it that way. So you end up like doing tons of techniques, and the techniques become the therapy rather than a therapy that uses techniques. And so part of the heart is staying with the process and bringing the techniques in as applicable, and not using them as the therapy. I'm going to do this one, then I'm going to do this one, then I'm going to do this one, right? And rather kind of coming back to a place where I'm going to be present with the client and see what unfolds as we begin to understand what's happening and how the client's behavior is functioning. Some examples of this kind of thing is was working with a client once doing a therapist once doing some supervision. And he really wanted to get the techniques down, but he wasn't thinking about their purpose or where you should apply them. And he did the, are you guys familiar with the chessboard metaphor? Most of you guys know that one? So basically the metaphor is that the board is you and the pieces are your emotions, thoughts, and experiences. And so you do a little exercise, and he did this beautiful technique exercise. And then he said to the client, "What do you think?" And the client says, "I don't understand." And he said, "I don't understand either," and just moved on right to the next technique. And so you can feel like it's sort of lost its purpose and its meaning. And we want to make sure that if we're doing a heartfelt thing, that the purpose and meaning are part of that process. Otherwise, you come into this place where ACT can start to just look like a cartoon of itself, right? I like this. My therapy is quite simple. I wag my tail and lick your face until you feel good about yourself again. And if you ever hear me say that looks like licks and wags, it's just too techniquey, right? Although I must tell you that licks and wags from dogs can actually make you feel quite good. And so there is that. But we want to pull back from the licks and wags and get more into what's happening in the room. What do you bring there? What is your intrapersonal and therapeutic presence? Because that will matter. And it's not just a verbal thing. It's also a felt thing. It's an experienced thing. And it absolutely can be cultivated. So let's look closely at what do you bring to the room in terms of this place of heart. So one thing that is, I think, present in all therapies and is certainly present in ACT and is part of our presence in the room is that we're vulnerable, genuine, and equal. The core competencies for becoming an ACT therapist are right inside of this. When you look at the therapeutic relationship competencies, they're right there. Probably the thing that's a little bit different from other therapies is the equal part. Like, we are both humans in this room, and we both have our own measure of pain. I don't ride above you in this process. This is a thing that we're doing together. And so this is gonna be part of our presence, the vulnerability, a genuineness, and equity between you and the person sitting across from you. The other thing that is in this is flexibility. And this is you being able to read what's happening and changing your course to fit the needs of the client at any moment. So you're responsive inside of the interpersonal relationship in terms of what you're seeing, you're responding to it. So you've got genuine, vulnerable, and equal, as well as flexible and responsive. And those seem like pretty standard things that we might bring into the therapy room. And so what I'd like to do is add another idea to presence. And it's this stance that I'm referring to when I say, what do you bring to the room? And I'm going to talk about it in two different ways. First, stance can be defined as an adopted mental or emotional presence. What is your, or if I were asking the question of myself, what is my adopted mental and emotional presence? And I think ACT can inform that very well. Am I open? Am I aware? Am I engaged in the therapy room? And then second, it can be defined as a position of the feet, like literally as a position of the feet. And the part that I like about this is that it's the feet that walk the values. And so you've got both an openness and a commitment that you're going to be in the room. And I'm going to hold this stance. And that holding this stance is going to allow me to do a number of very different things in terms of cultivating a presence. So I've got this lovely quote from Aristotle: knowing yourself is the beginning of all wisdom. And this is a key thing to cultivating this stance, is really connecting to who you are. And I want to talk about it, though, not just from a know your emotions or, be aware of your thoughts. I want to talk about it in terms of the three senses of self. So in acceptance and commitment therapy, and from the verbal understanding, relational frame theory, there's three ways in which a sense of self develops. Now, I do want to just put out this little teaser saying that self is also a word. It's not in you. It's the way to refer to you. And so I want to note that as we talk about the three senses of self, I recognize that self is also a passing experience, right? That does not exist in me. If there were anything that I would say exists, it's just being. And maybe that's the self that I'm referring to as the being self. But with these three senses of self, it can be really helpful to look at self as content. What are the stories of your life? What emotions, thoughts, sensations do you experience? That's the content of your life. And those are very important to know because we have stories about our lives that can show up in the therapy room. Our clients can be speaking to us about things that remind us of our own stories, or that, push a button and an emotion shows up, or some experience from the past is present. That's a content-oriented piece. And if we're aware of that, we can respond to it in a way that's helpful. If need be, we can put it in the room, or it stays with us because it's our content and doesn't belong in the room. It depends on the function. But the only way to really know is to be aware of your content. What are my stories? Where do I get hooked? How do I end up being judgmental? How do I end up pulling back? Where are my tender places with respect to my stories? Do I have a trauma? And do I see clients with trauma? And is that a tender space for me? And if so, what can I do with that relationship? And this is where the other two processes become so important. So there's all the content of your life, and just as your blood is in motion, that content is in motion. So there's self as process as well. That there is continuous fluid experience, whether it's your blood flowing or cells moving or emotions or thoughts or sensations, everything is on the move and it is unfolding across time. And there's a lot of freedom inside of recognizing that, because what it means is no state is permanent. Even that state that you might be experiencing in the room, if a client is, touching on something tender, you can be with it and let it pass and respond in ways that continue to be useful to the client. Your fluid process. And thirdly, self as context. And so if we go out even larger, take a higher perspective on what's happening, there's a consciousness, awareness, a place where process and content are unfolding. And that sense of you becomes incredibly important in creating a sense of presence in the room. If you can drop into and connect to this sense of you that is the stage for process and content and is not process and content itself, it invites lots of possibilities because you don't get rule bound, you're not fused with the rule, you're not in a place where you feel like you must do something like a technique. And it gives you the opportunity to recognize others in a similar fashion. And I'd like to invite you all to do an exercise with me to point to this place and to see what it is that I'm pointing to in terms of the freedom it can buy you in the room. So this will also be an eyes closed exercise, and I'm going to hope like crazy that my dogs are done. They're sleeping now, and so I'm hoping that it's all going to be good. It looks like they're all done playing, and so I'm happy about that. So again, I'll have you just get in a comfortable position and sit in a way that's alert in your chair. And I'll have you take a deep breath and gently blow out. And as you do, just close your eyes. Take a moment to settle in. Noticing the sounds in the room. And as you tune into sound, just be aware that your ears do not fold over and try to capture it or keep it away. They simply stand in reception. Receiving sound. Hearing. Then I'll invite you to expand your awareness, just letting it grow from your ears out into your body. Become aware of the flow of experience, whatever arises into your consciousness next, whether it be a sensation, an emotion, a thought, a memory. So whatever moves into consciousness, let it come, but also let it go. And watch the rise and fall of your experience. If your ears stand in reception, see if you can let your whole self stand and receive with each new experience. Noticing the process, the movement of you. I'll invite you to think, leaving this broader space, to think of a memory from this morning. It can be anything. Getting ready for the conference, eating a meal, can be anything from this morning, and just bring that memory into mind. Noticing the sounds and the experiences, qualities of being in that space while this memory is being created. As you notice this memory, notice that there's a you there, a self noticing the memory, a you seeing and observing this memory. And then gently releasing from this memory, I'm going to invite you to visit a painful memory, a time when you were struggling, a time when suffering was upon you. And again, just as you did with the memory from this morning, just notice what's happening. What are the sights and sounds of this memory? Here again, notice the noticer. There's a you having this memory. You're the place where this memory occurs, the context for it. You are larger than this memory. Therefore, you can't be this memory. And then gently shifting again, I'm going to invite you to find a memory of a time that was sweet, a time that was gentle or kind, a time when you felt perhaps joy. And just take a moment to notice this memory when you found it. Again, what's happening? What are the sights and sounds? And as you observe it, notice the observer, the same you that was there for the painful memory and the memory from this morning, that you stretch across these memories and are more than these memories. Now I'm going to invite you to release from these memories, expanding your awareness to everyone here in this room. And notice that each person was holding memories. One that was sweet, one that was painful, and one from this morning. And as you consider the other humans, the other beings that are here with us, noticing that they experience their body, the sensations, emotions, and thoughts, and they hold memories. And as you notice that in others, notice that whatever they hold here, it is not them. They are more than that. They are more than any memory, any sensation, any emotion, any thought. And notice how you can make room for that for another. That the others in this room are not defined by the content of their lives. But you wouldn't hold them as if they were a single memory, a single thought, or a single struggle. And as you see the kind of vastness of them, a sense of many memories and many experiences, and its fluid nature, notice that someone is noticing that about you. You, just as they, are not the content of your life. You are the place where this content lives and rolls through, it fluidly moves, yet you are more just as they are. See if you can just allow yourself to open up into this vast consciousness, context for you, place where life moves through you. And you can always observe. You stretch across these experiences. And with that, I'll have you take a deep breath. Begin to move around a little bit and gently rejoin the room. What I'll have you do, if you're interested, is to type any reactions you had to the exercise into the chat, and we'll take a look at it a little later. I'm hoping that you had a sense of connection to a sense of self that is more than the experiences you've encountered. Part of why I want to take a look at this sense of you, to take perspective on space and time. I can see me here doing this thing and it's painful, and I know that that was then and not now. That this creates a place where you can relate in the therapy room in a way that is free and solid. It's free and present. And it allows something that I think other kinds of therapies may not. So coming into the therapeutic group space from this place of kind of vast, not connected to any kind of this is my story. I have stories and they're true. I'm not saying stories aren't true, but I hold them very lightly, very lightly. And from that place, I can set a therapeutic intention where I'm holding the client as whole and fully capable. Because if I can see that they are not all their stories and all their emotions and all their thoughts, that they are a whole being, then I'm going to relate to them from that space. And holding somebody as whole creates alliance and connection. And holding them as capable might be a bit challenging too, but if you come in with growth is possible, setting this therapeutic intention from the ACT perspective is that values-based action is possible, and holding a genuine faith in the client's capacity to change is a very important place for you to be with the client, even the ones who say, I can't, I can't, I can't. This sort of place of you're whole and capable is respectful. It involves deep listening and empathy, but it's also vulnerable, and it's tucked inside of a developing relationship. And so if a client says to me, I can't, I invite them to not ask me to join them in that, because I'm always taking the stance that they are whole and capable, because I'm operating from that selfish context perspective. They are not their stories. They are not their memories. That's not a dismissive of those things. They have them for sure. It's just that they're not defined by them, even when they think they are. They do not dictate how their life will unfold from here forward. Change is possible in that place. Growth can happen. And so whole and capable is an assumption that I start with in creating that therapeutic presence. And I won't ask clients to have me hold them any other way. I will not hold you as incapable. I'll say that to clients all the time. I will not do it. Because if I hold you as incapable, then why are we in therapy? Right? If there's nothing that if you can't do it, then we are stuck and there's nowhere to go in that space. And I'll lean into that something can be done. If it is this big, something can be done. And it's just a matter of finding what it is and working on it. And I will use Stephen Hawking as an example here. Like, you know, this guy had terrible disease that took his muscles, took his body. And yet even towards the end, he was using his eyes to communicate on the computer. Just little tiny movements. And I think they used facial movements too. And that's how he communicated. That's how he engaged. And if he can do that, something can be done. Do you see what I'm saying? Something can be done, even if it's the smallest of change. So whole and capable. That's my stance towards the client in the room. And that change is possible. And the other thing that this sort of sense of freedom from content, I'm more than my content, creates is the possibility for being bold in therapy. So I don't have to get caught up in my fears, my content-oriented fears about what being bold in therapy means, or being extra cautious, or walking on eggshells, or treating the client with kid gloves. Like, if I'm coming from that position and I'm holding them in this as the same, two beings, then I can be bold and I can take risks as part of the change that we're looking for. And I can invite them to do the same. I can model it for them and they can join me in that process. Being bold is showing a readiness to take risk. It's genuine, it's courageous. And so I can put things in the room in a way that's powerful and connected to what the client is looking for, if I'm not tied up in my stories. And I can offer compassion with wisdom instead of compassion for compassion's sake. This is another bold thing to do. I think we quite often get caught up in the idea that we must kind of operate with a certain kind of compassion that has a popular quality to it. And I don't know if you guys have noticed this, but compassion has become kind of a more popular thing to do with your clients, and it's out there in the pop literature. But compassion without wisdom is not compassion. And we often don't talk about this. I want to offer compassion to my clients, but their behavior has consequences. And so I'm not going to offer compassion without consequences. Does that make sense? I can give you an example if that will help. Imagine that someone is bullying other people and they have been bullied themselves and they're in a lot of pain about their own bullying. And they get caught bullying and they come in and they say, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I was bullied myself. And sometimes I can get caught up in being a bully and I'll end up doing the thing that I dislike. When they say that and they apologize, it might seem like the thing to do is to come in with this compassion and say, it's okay, we've got you, no worries. However, if then they bully again and then they apologize again and they bully again and they apologize again, then that, and we just keep offering that compassion, it's okay, then we're missing something. We're missing compassion without wisdom. And that is, you cannot do this anymore. You cannot engage in these behaviors. The consequences are such. And that is the compassionate thing to do for both the people who are being bullied and the person who's doing the bullying. And so this sort of space gives you a place to be bold where you can engage in that kind of compassion without the fear of others around you saying you're not being compassionate, because actually you are. And this kind of boldness is not condescending, right? It's not patronizing or abusive or abandoning. It's a presence. And I'm going to be here, ready to take a risk, having compassion and issuing consequences where needed. This open space also allows us to hold tension in the room without being too reactive to the different kinds of tensions. So it gives us a place where we can be bold, and it gives us a place where we can stand in two places that can sort of feel like they're in competition with each other. So skilled act therapists who sit inside of a presence, a stance of whole and capable, and that I am more than my content and my process, can hold multiple tensions at a time because they're not attached to one way of being or another. So this is part of why awareness is so important, by the way. You have to kind of watch what's happening. Am I getting caught in my own content? And then you want to be able to discern when and how to act on these tension places. And just to give an example of what I'm speaking to, what are the different kinds of tensions that we might be asked to hold? Like, how long do you maintain silence before speaking? And if you feel that tension, I can hold that space. Or establishing more versus less boundaries. Do I interrupt and redirect, or do I quietly listen? Do I reinforce? Do I not reinforce? Focusing on what is being said versus what is not being said. Confronting versus not confronting. Disclosing versus not disclosing. Like, there's all kinds of tensions in the therapy room. And that sense of self as context, that perspective allows us to hold these without acting on them too soon. We have time to discern what is the way to go here, what is going to function to work at this point. We don't have to solve the silence really rapidly. We don't have to push the boundaries too far out or something like that. We can be considered in our actions from this place. The other thing that I want to add here that has more to do with values, but it also stems from self as context, is what I call compassionate immediacy. And this also is folded into the presence. And this is expressing a sense of urgency, but not a panic, not a fear-based thing. It's a leaning in, and here's why the urgency. Life is short. We only have so much time here on earth. Clients only have so much time here. And I want to be able to lean in a compassionate way with this urgency, like, let's make change happen. Let's compassionately find a way to move forward in your life and not take too much time avoiding, running away, fusing, worrying about the past, worrying about the future. Let's leap. And sometimes it's a leap of faith, but let's leap. And so as I start to wind down a bit in terms of what I'm talking about, when we are able to connect with self as context, it frees us to, because we're not attached to ideas necessarily, to be bold, to bring in compassionate immediacy, to hold tensions. It just creates this kind of vast space where lots of things can happen. And if you bring that inside of this intention, I will be here now, aware of my experience and your experience, recognizing that these are deeply intertwined. But that kind of conscious being in therapy that is present to my experience and yours is going to create a kind of presence in the room. And I think it's going to create a sense of safety and a sense of warmth and a sense of I'm here to help. I'm here to hear you. So the stance that I'm referring to is a place that's occupied by experience and body, and it entails a particular kind of relationship with yourself and others. It has to do with awareness, and it's linked to 6 core processes and what that therapeutic relationship looks across time. And I'm sort of using the metaphor of feet, that this stance, this position is one of the feet. And I think of them as like kind of grounded and maybe even rooted like a tree into the ground. And so, like, I will not waver. I will not shrink away from your pain. I will not falter in terms of the capacity to make change. And sometimes I even imagine myself as a rooted tree in the room when the storms are big in the room. And so I'm bringing with me this kind of boldness and speaking from my heart as I go. Compassionate presence. So in its fullness, the stance of the ACT therapist is not a separable into all categories. You're like this or you're like that. Rather, it's a set of interwoven concepts that are tied together in whole cloth by the threads of what it means to engage in a relationship designed to compassionately support another being in creating a meaningful life. And the way it's defined, and it also includes what we've been talking about, right? It involves being able to be open and aware and engaged with yourself. It means understanding your behavior and knowing when you're fused and avoidant, if you've moved away from your values in some way. It also includes, like, am I aware of how others see me? Am I connected to that perspective as well? And asking the question, what will I bring? Every time I enter into the therapy room, what will I bring? And I like this quote by Pema Chodron because it's kind of what I want to see in the room as a conscious being from this vast space. Is this allowing that is awake to and experience how large and fluid and full of color and energy our world is. And I want to see that in my client, like how large they are, all the thousands of memories and the emotions and the thoughts. And even if they're calling themselves worthless, it's just a little blip on the page of all of the things that they experience. How large and fluid and full of color and energy our client is. And you can sort of feel a quality of hope inside of that, because I do have hope for the client, even if I don't have hope for the agenda of control and trying not to feel, trying not to be human. And if we're going to work on our presence in therapy, we're going to stand in a place where we're beginning to connect to our own presence, our own treeness. It might cause some discomfort. We might see places that we are afraid in therapy, or we might see places where we get anxious and don't know what to do. That's okay. Discomfort is good. It precedes growth. So as I begin to wind down, I'm going to give the actual definition of what Steve Hayes has written about ACT in the therapeutic relationship. He says the therapist detects instances of psychological flexibility and inflexibility in their clients and use a flexible responses to establish a therapeutic relationship that models, instigates, and reinforces client psychological flexibility. So do you think you could use flexibility anymore inside of that? Like this is it, like it reinforces flexibility essentially. And I agree. The therapist maintains a stance that instigates and reinforces psychological flexibility, but I would add again, and has heart. I will be there in a bold, compassionate immediacy, holding you whole and capable kind of way. You will know that my heart is in the room inside of this presence. So certainly X heart is about process and function. There's no doubt, like those are the key kind of places where you're taking the techniques and you're doing the analysis to see what the behavior is about. But I would also add that X heart is also about being open, aware, and engaged inside of a present of whole and capable self and other. And ultimately, what's going to guide us is our values. And I will share with clients, and I'll share with you that values are incredible places to go, and we have values as clinicians in the room, but they can't be lived from holding still. And just as we are in motion, our values are going to be in motion, and how we engage them are going to be in motion, and we are carried into and through our values with our actions. And so whatever you do in the therapy room in terms of creating presence, if it's values motivated, it's going to be found in what you do, not just what you say. And so I will say life is found in the feet, not in the head. Bring your heart along. It's all about motion. And another thing to know, as you're considering your own presence and your own cultivation of process and awareness in session, is that there's no arrival. There's no time when you get to awareness and you're done. This is a lifelong endeavor, a lifelong practice. And I will end by just pointing to myself here. I mean, here I am at age 12 in the pink outfit. And you can see these other photos of myself at different times in my life. And I'm heading towards this place. This woman here on the right is my mother. And I'm a process. I'm moving and changing, and I'm larger than any of the content in my life. And I recognize that process. And I'm moving towards an older version of me, carrying all that I will carry. And you are a process as well. You will not be done until you're done. And so keep building this place called presence in the here and now. And I'll just, to wrap up with the presentation, share something that my mother sent to me when she was still alive. Life should not be a journey to the grave with the intention of arriving safely in a pretty and well-preserved body, but rather to skid in broadside in a cloud of smoke, thoroughly used up, totally worn out, and loudly proclaiming, "Wow, what a ride." And I love that because I want that for you, and I want it for my clients, and I want to come in with a boldness, compassionate immediacy, and whole and capable for the clients that we see. And that is what I'm thinking about when I'm thinking about therapeutic presence. So let me pause there and see if there are any questions, any responses, comments to some of what I've shared. We just have a few minutes left. It went by so fast, but let me just see if there are any feedback or thought or questions that I can answer in the short period of time that we have left. Let me ask you, did it make sense to you? Some of the, oh, here we go. Looks like Sonali has a question.
Hey there. Hi. Yes. It was so beautiful to listen to your conversation. It was very empathically held. It was as though you were holding the space for all of us and to feel into the process of ACT a little bit more. My question is regarding the process of educating the client on the process of dysfunction a little bit, because I feel like, is there a place in therapy where we can remind the client that some of the self-concepts that they may have internalized, such as unworthiness or not being whole or not being enough, it might also be part of the relational, cultural, or societal dysfunction, if I may say, and it's not particularly either their fault, but it's just that we didn't have a healthy model of relating and growing up and changing as a human being. And so my question more so is from that stance of, bringing a healthy model to the client and kind of showing that, some of the things that we've actually grown up with were actually not healthy, and that's not part of the fault of the client.
Yes. I think I hear exactly what you're saying, right? We all have these cultural messages that we learn, and you can't unlearn. Like if you learn something that you just can't unlearn it. Like once you've got it, you've got it. And so if that is the case, how are you going to relate to it becomes really important. And I love this little piece that you can do to help clients kind of get to a space where they can see that a little easier. And typically what I'll do is invite them to, I'll just do this here. I'll invite all of you to go back to a time in your life when you remember when you were quite young, when you kind of knew that the world didn't work the way you'd like it to, where you had maybe some pain or some shame or some doubt. And just pick a time when you were younger. It could be 7, 8, 9, where the world wasn't actually kind. Can all of you think of a time like that? Pretty easy for me to think of, and can everyone just hold? And then picture yourself at that age and notice what's happening to you during this painful time. And then ask, did you ask that? Did you want that thing that was happening to you? Were you asking for it? Were you telling others you wanted it? Or did it visit you? It visited you. And if that little self, that you that was there back then that encountered this thing that was visited upon them could look forward and into your life now, would they intend for you to still be struggling this way? And if the answer is no, they didn't want this for you as you grow older, whatever your pain is today, then you get this kind of softness around the dislike of self, or I'm not worthy, or I'm not okay, right? Like these messages got on board, and it's not that you wanted them. You didn't go to somebody and say, could you give me negative messages so that I can feel this way when I get older? And when you got the message, you then didn't say, gosh, I hope you're still struggling with this as you get older too, right? Like it softens that sort of sense of, oh yeah, that wasn't what I was trying to have in my life. Maybe I'm okay. Maybe I'm not those words. Is that helpful? Does it answer the question?
Yeah, so much. I think it's so important for us ourselves as holders of space to remind ourselves and people around us this in a feeling, reinforcing, reminding, healthy way. So I think this conference and the spaces like these and conversations like these like bring us back to that remembrance, and that we can take this back out into the world and in our interaction. So much gratefulness.
It's my pleasure. My pleasure. Are there any other questions?
Yeah, and Robyn, just there are so wonderful comments coming in. All of us are just, struck by that was so beautifully, presented. We are just so thankful to you. And if you can also, like people are actually being touched, they're sharing about their experiences. So just wanted to share our heartfelt gratitude on behalf of all of them. And whatever you shared, I think for me, what resonated not just as a therapist, but as a human being, just remembering that I'm more than my own stories and I'm constantly changing. I'm in the process. It's such a beautiful reminder just to respecting my life, respecting those small tiny moments that I'm having and I'm living. So thank you so much for bringing that reminder and those wonderful exercises. So yeah, thank you.
It's my pleasure, and thank you to all of you for coming and participating. I hope this is helpful. This is the thing. This is the thing that I love in ACT, is that if you can come to that place of selfish context, it just makes so many things possible, because this is where freedom is, and in that space. And so thank you all for inviting me.
Thank you for being with us.
No, yes, thank you. And thanks to everybody. I might try to, I'm going to go to bed here soon. And I know you guys will be conferencing all day.
Yeah.
Are you conferencing on Sunday as well?
Yes. Yeah. It's a 3-day conference.
And is it the same link?
Second day. Yeah. Yeah.
The second link. Well, if I can, I'll try to come in and just listen in a little bit and see how things are going.
That would be wonderful to have you. Thank you, Robyn. Thank you so much. And yeah, thank you, everybody.
Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.
Okay, so thank you, everyone, for being here. And yeah, as I can see, like it was very powerful, very touching experience. So yeah, with the same presence in us, with the hope that we remember all this whenever it's required, we'll take a pause here and we'll meet at 11 o'clock. So just take care of yourself, and I'll see you at 11 o'clock in the next session. Thank you. Bye.